The Praetorium Maximus echoed with the deep grating of large scales, but all attention was drawn to the new, impudent clinking sounds as a force of tiny figures marched up one of the last empty caverns. The humanoid's white-scaled head stood in stark contrast to his glistening black eyes, his bright blue bejeweled robes, and the dull black armor of the 4x4 Death Knight phalanx which fell in behind him. Those undead Dragonborn standing guard perfectly still. Their white-snouted leader seemed unfazed by the ring of 5 titanic true dragons staring at him from the other immense caverns which faced the center of the hall. One other tunnel was empty, while the last contained another small party of Dragonborn, those all green-scaled like their master, and none of them undead.
Am I to understand that Lady Paragos dares to send mere servants in her place?
Boomed Tsuchal the White, whose scales and graceful head shape closely matched those of the little biped, but whose own onyx eye was larger in diameter than the Dragonborn was tall. As does Gorlix, the servant responded flatly, without fear, nor deference, nor bravado, pointing a stark white finger at the similarly small green delegation. His voice, deep by human standards, echoed around the enormous caverns like a tiny chirp, but the audience were dragons, with the keen senses of all their godlike kind, so no amplification was required. The leader of the Green Dragonborn, whose eyes glowed bright neon green, responded, their mouth glowing too when it opened, and the voice of Lord Gorlix the Green boomed out of their servant at full draconic volume, a far mightier version of the ventriloquism practiced by lesser green dragons.
I am present in spirit. I listen and can respond. Can Paragos say the same?
My Lady Paragos was unable to attend. She sent me to speak for her interests. It is as simple as that, chirped the tiny white.
She disrespects the entire concept of Conventum Dominorum. I should freeze your blood where you stand,
thundered the great white dragon, extending his neck, his head crossing almost to the center of the neutral circle between each of their cavernous places.
Or we could just start,
rumbled enormous Zithros the Black, sounding bored. And Tsuchal backed down with a low growl, giving natural deference to the only first one present. Zithros was even larger than Azarathrax the Red, daughter of Archathrax, despite the Red's faster growth rate. However, it was she who commenced the proceedings.
Nos, domini draconis, proles Tiamat, et rectores mundi. Iterum convidimus ad statuendum continentiu.
Not all dragons appreciated ceremony, but these, the old and powerful ones, whose accumulation of achievements and treasures had sated, or at least abated, their aggressive instincts and inherent need to prove themselves, they appreciated ceremony. The rhythm of the ancient words, deeply echoing through these hallowed halls, which had been carved by the speaker's father, the mighty Lord Archathrax, seemed to bleed away some of the tension. Here and now, they convened once more to debate the path of dragonkind, of both their continents. And though they would doubtless rage again throughout these discussions, for now, the momentousness of the occasion and that sense of their collective power fed the endless hunger that was their pride. Decentis, the small white servant of the mighty blue dragon, watched and noted all this. After several minutes of ancient rote pronouncements and responses, and Tsu's dirty looks as Decentis chirped their tiny substitutes for the rightful lines of their master, Paragos the Blue, finally the real discussions began. Blue Paragos and Red Azarathrax led the Council of Novendil, which had ruled the western continent since they had reclaimed the vast territory seized by traitor Dragonborn. Traitors who had risen up like ants, killing their own gods with a hubris verging on insanity. Decentis stifled the urge to snort in disgust at the mere thought of such senseless rebellion. Gorlix the Green represented a lesser faction on that continent. Dragons who wanted to pursue trade or even alliances with the Eldar of the Third Land and with the rebel Kuatoa of the Western Seas, who were so desperately battling their own bloodthirsty brethren. The dragons of the Eastern continent, Haruan, were even less organized. They did not even have a proper council, though most of them looked to either Red Ajna for leadership or to Silver Oaxa. Oaxa seemed no more interested in claiming ownership over the world than Gorlix and his ilk. She and the many who followed her were quite content to lord over their own little territories, to work together to ensure that a servant rebellion would never be repeated, and to simply hope that the few things in this world which posed a threat to dragonkind would leave them be. Ajna, by contrast, understood, like Paragos and her faction, that there were great dangers in the world which must be destroyed before they arrived on these shores, and that the proper place of all Tiamat's children was to rule. However, awareness of the dangers spurred him not to swift action, but to some deluded notion that all dragonkind must be united in order to win. Not just those factions represented here, but those who were scattered around this world and even the other planes.
It is still a fool's errand, Ajna. 100 years have passed, and you are no closer to your goals.
Azarathrax snorted at Ajna, the two enormous red dragons flaring their wings as much as they could, though even the enormous caverns of the Praetorium Maximus were not wide enough for the full wingspans of such mighty fire dragons. Cinders from Azarathrax's nostrils rained down upon the glittering stone floors. Stone which had been melted into magma by her father's legendary breath when the assassins came for him, along with much of his treasure hoard. Magma which had long since cooled and rehardened into shallow, permanent waves of black rock, rippled with an immeasurable wealth of gold and silver.
Patience is power,
responded Lord Ajna. Tsu snorted derisively at the draconic truism, but Zitharos nodded his massive, sleek, snake-like head, and Ajna continued.
You know as well as I that some of our strongest kin are those who have left. The Sky Dragons, the Deep One, Lord Hazkrakor.
Hazkrakor serves. They're not even master of their own domain,
objected Sushal the White, whose frozen kingdom straddled the two sides, both geographically and metaphorically. But Ajna was undaunted.
Yes, they do serve another, and doing so has allowed them to wield Eclipse, the Ebon Blade. Our stranger kin may be the strongest of us all.
But they all left, emphasized isolationist Oaxa, her silvery voice pitch-perfectly tuned to convey reasonability. How many do you think would ever join you? How many of their reasons for leaving do you think have changed?
Like that golden Friek,
spake Gorlix the Green through his servant, such a bizarrely powerful voice to emerge from a mere 7-foot-tall vessel.
You mock, but her intelligence network is beyond the workings of your imagination, and my servants have made contact with her own. She has not outright rejected my proposals, should certain conditions be met.
Surprising,
murmured Black Zitharos, in a tone which resonated with the walls, his voice so powerful Decentis could feel the ground shake for the duration of that word.
Conditions,
scoffed Gorlix through his dragonborn's glowing mouth.
Maybe you have one. Maybe. But there are real allies to be had in the West. Dietrich and Floretta are as old as the first ones.
The servant nodded respectfully in the black dragon's direction, though it was still odd to hear the names of non-dragons uttered in this place. Gorlix continued,
"And their hoard is as great as any of ours. Perhaps greater, for their vault holds mostly weapons and artifacts of great power. I believe my golden freak has them beat,"
added Ajna, with good humor.
"Fair," admitted the green puppet. "But then there are the rebels on their island. If even a fraction of what I have heard is true about their champion, Unon—"
"Impossible,"
growled Red Azarathrax.
"If even a fraction of their lies were true, the seas would boil at his passing."
"We should be the last to underestimate the power of a god's blood,"
said Zithros, about as quietly as a gargantuan creature can, and the others gave respect once more, despite, or perhaps because, of his reluctance to get entangled in their policy debates. "Nevertheless," Detentis spoke up, as Perigos would have done had she been present, "we would be fools to trust lesser species."
"Like yourself,"
interrupted White Susal, like a viper's strike. But the servant of Blue Perigos continued undaunted. "And we cannot count on those who have abandoned the conventum. All of us, here, together, have more than enough power to begin hunting down our real enemies. All we need is unity." The blue-robed dragonborn servant surveyed the room. Azarathrax was his master's ally, though they differed in some key regards. But Ajna needed to be convinced of the urgency of action, otherwise his fanciful crusade would delay them forever. Gorlix was a useless fool, and the others were too content to laze around in their comfortable lairs.
"We, us,"
sneered Susal.
"How dare a lowly insect speak in such terms within this place? Lady Azarathrax, do you think your father would have allowed such an insult?"
"Do not presume to tell me what Lord Arcathrax would have thought,"
she responded, rising on her forelegs, stretching her neck up to look down from near the ceiling. "Poorly played, Sue," thought Decentis. "My master, Lady Perigos, trusts me to speak for her, to voice only that which she would say if she were here."
"Attacking the messenger is a waste of time,"
rumbled Black Zithros.
"Oh, please."
Susal was getting defensive now.
"You just want to mate with Perigos again. She's not even here to appreciate your defense of her peon."
"My master, Perigos the Blue, has expressed openness to such an offer from mighty Zithros," pronounced the servant with maximum formality, seeking to drain any humor or smugness from the statement. The white dragon stared at the tiny white biped in angry disbelief, lip curling into a snarl, whilst the great black worm, as old as any mortal still living, said nothing and showed no expression with such intensity that it made his interest crystal clear.
"Infighting serves none of us,"
said Ajna, as diplomatically as he could manage.
"I have envoys in all 3 planes, seeking those who are not with us, and I am confident that within the next decade—"
"You fool!"
muttered Gorlix. It sounded uncannily like the dragon speaking under his breath, despite the sound emanating from the mouth of his diminutive, glowing-eyed servant, who was currently looking down beside him, apparently at nothing. All present were confused, if not shocked, by the rudeness, but it quickly became obvious that the ventriloquism was carrying a side conversation not intended for the gathering.
"You are interrupting me at the conventum! What? A monitor? Here! I will destroy them!"
All conversation in the praetorium was suspended, with many pairs of massive eyes all focused on the green dragon's mouthpiece, as the rest of Gorlix's retinue looked to their fellow with great nervousness and concern. There was no more speech for a minute. but the remote communication spell still seemed to be active, judging by the bright green glow of the servant's eyes and mouth.
A monitor?
Breathed Silver Oaxa.
I thought Gorlix was looking to ally with the Illud. Why would they?
What about the other ones?
Growled Azarathrax, since the silence had been broken.
If the Empire suspected, do you think...
Tsuchal froze as he was interrupted by Gorlix.
Die, maggot!
The green dragon's voice echoed from their tiny vessel, who then opened his sharp, angular mouth wide and breathed a bizarre, hoarse pantomime of his master's lethal acid breath. Dragonborn servants had been created in the image of their masters, so they too had breath weapons, of a sort. A tiny, flimsy imitation, which had become weirdly decoupled from the color of their scales. This was not the servant's attack, though, just a weird side effect of the ventriloquist's connection. Dicentis watched. Curious, Oaxa was holding her breath.
Ugh!
The puppet exclaimed as though in pain.
What? God, curse you!
Suddenly the glow faded and the green dragonborn collapsed, his fellows crowding around his unconscious body.
I'm going!
Growled Lady Azarathrax in rage.
Gorlix's lair is over 10 hours south by wing.
Zetheros dredged up from his centuries of soaring over the continents over 1,000 years ago. But Azarathrax had already snaked her neck around behind her, calling down the tunnel.
Orb!
And she began clawing at the ground beneath her. Novendil is too far from Diluvian territory for a monitor to strike, Dicentis reasoned aloud. It makes no sense to—
Monitors don't care about borders,
snapped back Tsuchal, though he sounded far from certain.
But I can't believe those disgusting fish would dare.
Azarathrax had been scratching arcane circles into the cave floor. In fact, scratch was almost a demeaning term, her claw carving the sigils in 6-inch wide grooves, more than 2 feet deep through the black, gold-striped igneous stone.
Remember what happened to Gargavron of Brass 2 centuries ago,
intoned the ancient black dragon.
The Gua are tiny. Each one has a mere fraction of the divine blood we bear. But their god still lives.
With that grim pronouncement, a pair of Azarathrax's servants arrived from the cavern behind her, unwrapping a fine cloth to reveal an 8-inch insectoid eye, which gleamed with an eerie light. They backed off, practically fled, as their master plucked the eye off the cloth, placing it in the center of the deeply carved rune, and began chanting words of power.
If Gorlix is truly dead, if this monitor killed him so quickly, it must be a death fin,
warned her fellow Red, Ajna.
You would already be too late to rescue, and you don't even know.
But though Azarathrax did not interrupt her chanting, her glance was such that it shut Lord Ajna right up. The others, too, held their tongues, but Dicentis bowed. Good luck, Lady of the Red, and an instant later, the daughter of Arcathrax disappeared. The inconceivable red mass of Lady Azarathrax teleported into existence on the great flagstones just outside the immense arched entrance to the stronghold of the Green Dragon Lord, Gorlix. The hill containing his cavernous complex was surrounded by glorious tall forests, yet the nearest of trees were sickly, and the whole area smelled of stinging chlorine. The dry tree trunks quaked at the red dragon's footsteps. There was no sign of life around the entrance, not a single servant in sight. But even past the chemical scent, the red dragon's keen nose picked out the blood-iron scent of dead dragonborn. She strode in, ready for attack from any direction, observing the many corpses within. Nearly all of Gorlix's servants were green, matching his own scale color. And while a few here were cut in half, most appeared to have been crushed to death, not flattened as by a worm, but their chests or heads bashed in by great strength channeled through an impact the size of a humanoid's hand. The smell of acid, fresh, concentrated acid now, not just the lingering tinge that harassed the nearest trees outside, grew viciously strong as, several chambers in, Azarathrax came upon the motionless body of Gorlix. One of his great emerald eyes had been hollowed out, and the room had been splashed as though by waves of blood. The broad, jagged, still wet trails were emitting odd steam as blood mixed with the acidic residue of his last breath weapon attack, and the trails led back to that hole in the green dragon's face. Azarathrax, however, was fixated on a presence standing behind the enormous, sinuous corpse, a motionless 5-foot figure that she smelled before she saw, whose position she subconsciously sensed, not from any sound of its own, but by the reflected echoes of the dragon's own footsteps on the cavern walls.
"Come forth and die, little fish,"
she snarled, preparing herself for a savage battle, remembering her father's account of battling that one deadly Finlord Monitor. The fishman strode casually around an awkwardly splayed, green-scaled forelimb, with bulbous eyes protruding from a black, full-face cloth mask, matching its loose martial arts robes. The Kuatoa croaked in introduction.
"I am Deathfin."
As they spoke, their form, body and clothes, began to ripple, as though being washed over by waves of blue bubbles or scales, and their voice softened as they shape-shifted into a blue-skinned, elven or human woman with sharp, straight, swept-back horns, in a shimmering, long-tailed dress, smiling.
"Deathfin
Paragos." Azarathrax thought she had been prepared for anything. Insane strength, mystical attacks, bare-handed vorpal strikes. But now she recoiled in moral horror.
Paragos? What have you done?
Lady Paragos the Blue, in human form, or her interpretation thereof, narrowed her grin to one of grim amusement. Her draconic scent no longer disguised. She shook off some of the blood on her hand, which had remained through her transformation, then stooped down to pull something from one of Gorlix's claws. Improved the quality of discourse. She stood back up, the large silver hoop in her hand clearly a magical ring, as it was already shrinking to a fraction of its size, a size that would fit her long-nailed but otherwise smooth and human-like fingers, though she did not put it on. And I think I found an upgrade for my servant.
We are trying to unite our kin. You can't just kill them in the middle of Conventum Dominorum.
Azarathrax had never actually liked Gorlix, but her friend and co-leader had clearly gone too far. Insanely far. Gorlix was killed
by a monitor.
She mimicked that other form's burbling croak for the last 3 words. His ridiculous obsession with bipedal allies got him killed. They could never truly side with us, and it's a waste of time to try because we are meant to conquer them too. All of them. I know you agree.
And who are you going to kill next? Lord Ajna? Sushar is a bit of a prick. Are you going to murder him too?
Dragons have fought and killed each other since the beginning, but I don't take such drastic steps unless it is strategically necessary. Su can bitch all he wants. I'm sure he'll fall in line when things get started. And I don't even disagree with Ajna. Not really. I would love to bring back some of our missing kin. If he succeeds in finding the Deep One, or convincing Hazkrakor to drop their ridiculous charade, so much the better. But we need to convince him of the urgency. We can't wait another couple centuries. There are other powers building, and we need to move before they do. Before they are ready. Azarathrax shook her gargantuan head, staring at the horrible void in the green dragon's eye socket as she tried to process her friend's cold logic.
God damn it, Para!
Don't worry about it, Azzy. You did your best, but arrived too late to save him. The Deathfin who slew Gorlix was gone. Convince them to extend the Conventum another 2 days to deal with the implications of this outrage. I will find time to attend the third day once I receive this terrible news.
There are only so many of us, only so many ancient ones, and we need everyone if we are going to conquer the worlds. The other species may look weak, but Gorlix was not wrong about the strength that some of them are hiding.
If they weren't strong, you and I would have left all the others behind. We'd be picking out mountains in the Third Land right now. I know what I'm doing. Lady Paragos grinned in a way that was doubtless intended to be reassuring, with a mouthful of interlocking triangular teeth that would have fit her Kuatoa form much more accurately than her human one.
No more killing, and goddamn warn me about your schemes,
Azarathrax admonished, jabbing a claw much larger than her blue friend's entire current size, dangerously close to Paragos, who didn't even blink. You'll have plenty of time to think on the flight back. You'll see that I'm right. I'll replace the Eldritch Eye you spent to get here. That was a nice touch on your part.
A nice touch,
Azarathrax grumbled, turning to head out, suddenly anxious to get away from her longtime friend, to be alone, high up in the winds, to think. By the way, the red dragon turned back again, looking over her shoulder, as Paragos leaned forward expectantly, her eyes just a little bigger than seemed natural for her human-sized face. Did Zitharos look interested?